Hello and welcome everybody to this session, which is a live questions and answers event for potential applicants for the Turing Scheme funding in the 2026 to 27 academic year for the schools sector. My name's Martin and I work on the Turing Scheme team at the Department for Education. So for today's session, it's important to note that the session is being recorded. We will be publishing a recording of this on the Department for Education's YouTube channel. In order to facilitate this, and we have disabled all of the attendee cameras and microphones for the webinar. However, there is a questions and answer function through which you can submit your questions during the webinar, and we will endeavour to answer as many as we can during the session. As noted, all questions will be displayed to others in the chat, so please don't put personal information about people who you might be considering, etc., in your questions. If there are any questions that we're unable to answer today, we'll take them away to answer by correspondence. We'll also flag how you can get in touch with us through the Turing Scheme inquiry function, which will take you to our help desk. This is ideal for if your query is either more urgent or more personal and detailed about the circumstances of the particular application you're looking to put forward. To ensure that the session remains focused on assisting those who are seeking to apply for funding for the academic year of the Turing Scheme for 26-27, this isn't a forum for any queries about current live projects for 25-26 or earlier years. Anything about those should be referred to us through the Turing Scheme inquiry form, and our help desk will deal with them. Okay. So this session is for providers who are considering making an application for funding to the Turing Scheme for placements in the 26 to 27 academic year in the school's funding stream. We've already got YouTube videos that give an overview of the guidance and application process for this year of the Turing Scheme on gov.uk. You can find those on the YouTube channel for DFE Sector Communications. We've got separate videos for those who are new to the scheme and those who have previously applied that focuses on the changes, as well as one for all audiences that covers the application and assessment process. An important thing to note is that this webinar depends on your participation. Please do ask questions in the question and answer box as we go through, and the bulk of this call will be us trying to answer as many of those as we can, and addressing any questions that you bring to us today. We do have a few questions that have been asked in the period since we opened for applications that we'll cover. And I'm joined today by a number of colleagues from across the Turing Scheme team who will be able to answer various issues that you have in the various areas of work that the team covers. So please start putting your questions in, and we will continue to address as many as we can. As we said on the webinar that we recorded, we really hope that you're able to apply for funding this year, and we wish you all the best for your applications. I'll hand over now to my colleague. Pete.
Yeah, hi there. As Martin mentioned, we're going to quickly cover off a few of the sort of questions that have come in advance and have sort of been asked by a few people through the help desk process. So my name's Pete. I'm the policy and comms lead for the Turing Scheme, and I'll cover off a few of these initial questions sent in advance. So one thing that people have asked us in advance has been around what we mean in our YouTube video guidance when we talk about enhancing transferable skills, and whether we can provide some more information on the skills and outcomes that we're looking for when we look at and assess Turing Scheme applications. So I would point you towards the gov.uk guidance page called Apply for Funding for International Placements, and we can put a link to that in the chat. And that sets out some more detail on 4 particular areas where we are particularly interested in the skills and outcomes that students can develop. So those areas are transferable skills, so abilities that can be applied in different settings that might support success in study, employment, and everyday life. Intercultural learning and global awareness, so that's about understanding and respecting different cultures and perspectives and being able to participate in different environments. Personal development, so that can be growth in confidence, independence, resilience, and self-awareness to help students and apprentices to manage change and overcome challenges. And also subject-specific knowledge and skills. So these could be knowledge or skills that are directly linked to a student's course or field of study. So you can find more information on those particular outcomes on the Apply for Turing Scheme Funding guidance on Gov.uk. And this year we tried to provide some more guidance on a number of functions about what we're expecting to see in the applications. So another question asked in advance was whether you can swap students for members of staff later down the line. So the answer is yes, you can, if you need to, swap a student for a member of staff. However, that comes with some caveats. So we would still expect that if you do make changes to the profile of who's going on your Turing Scheme placement, that you still deliver the aims and objectives that you set out in your application. And we would also want to make sure that the ratio of staff to students still remains proportionate and based on a solid risk assessment. So there are sufficient members of staff to sort of safeguard students whilst on placements, but also, you know, that the focus is still very much on delivering for students as well. Another question we've been asked in advance is whether you can move funding between categories when managing a project. The thing I would say for now is that more information will be set out in the guidance that you'll receive if successful in receiving applications. We do adjust the rules for this each year, and it's somewhat complex. There are some categories of funding between which you can move funds in the current year and some which you can't. So you would receive more information on that if you were successful in applying for funding, and it shouldn't particularly affect the need to make an application at this stage. One other question is whether you can how you go about accessing the service and adding an account so you can make a Turing Scheme application. So if this is your first time, the vast majority of applicants will apply online through the Turing Scheme service, and there are two sign-in routes for that. So if you already have a DFE sign-in account, you can use that. And so that most organisations that are based within England, which are schools, colleges and universities, will have one of those, and they can use a DFE sign-in account. Or you can create a local Turing Scheme account if you don't have that DFE sign-in. So that which route you take will depend on the type of organisation you are and with the nation that you're based in. But when you go through to make your application online, the Turing Scheme service should walk you through which sign-in method to use. And if you have any doubt or concerns or any issues doing that, please contact the help desk using the inquiry form, and they'll be able to help you out with that as well. So one other question I wanted to cover was around the application of limits on the amount of funding that you can apply for. So you may, as was the case in the Turing Scheme last year, there is a limit on how much funding you could apply for as a school. So as a school, you can apply for up to £50,000 worth of funding as a single applicant, or £300,000 if you're applying as a consortium, although there are lower limits if you've got fewer than 6 members in your consortium. Some people have asked us, queried why in their application, as they're adding their placements, they're able to add over £50,000 worth of placements. And the thing we would just flag is that when you go to submit, you won't be able to submit your application for more than that upper limit. So this year, that upper limit will apply when you come to submit your application. So as you're profiling your placements, do make sure that you're ultimately under that limit when you get to that point of submitting, and we will not fund you above those application limits. However, we are aware that as you add your placements, you may wish to sort of test out different numbers and scenarios, and therefore you can add more than that value when you're just sort of working on the application in draft. Okay, so just going to start picking up some questions from the chat. So starting at the top. So question from Millie. Colleagues of queries have queried about the UK returning to the Erasmus scheme and what will happen to the Turing scheme as a result of this. We'll share more details on that in due course. No further information that we'll share at this stage, but do keep an eye out for more information from us, and we'll share more on that later. Next question from Ed. So as part of our visit, do we need to meet or work with a host school or community group? Is it possible to complete a conservation project? So yes, it is possible. There is I'll set out on the school's guidance. There is guidance on the range of different organisations that you can partner with, but it's not just limited to a school or a community group. And we can add a link to that guidance so you can see that full range of opportunities. So just moving down, a question from Christine. As a local authority representative, can we apply on behalf of A, one school, or B, or a trust? So the answer is yes. I might bring in my colleague, if that's okay, Becca. Becca, I don't know if you're able to pick up now or if we can answer that one in the chat.
Yes, I can talk to that if that's okay, and if you can hear me okay. So you would be able to submit an application. Unfortunately, the system would only allow you to submit one application. So we would recommend that you could have a number of schools in one consortium application. Alternatively, if there are too many schools to include in that consortium, they are able to apply in their own right up to the cap of 50k for a single provider application. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Thanks, Becca. So next question, is there a pass grade for an application? No. So in previous years, the application for funding for schools and FE, and well, across all the sectors actually, is highly competitive. So when we are deciding how to allocate funding, we will use a combination of the application score overall and the proportion of students with a disadvantaged background in the placement, which is a very important priority for us, and use a weighted combination of that to determine which applications are funded. So we will then allocate out funding up to the limits per organisation using that ranking until the funding's used up. So there isn't a set pass grade for an application. It's really those that come out best out of that ranking system. So there isn't a sort of minimum kind of floor to be aiming for. You should really aim to put in as good a quality application as you can. So next question, it's one application per school, but that can be for multiple mobilities, can't it? If one proposed mobility was weaker on the application than the other, would that lead to us being less likely to get the funding altogether, or would you award less tellers only to go to the stronger mobility? Yeah, so it is more an application per school, and you absolutely can put in multiple placements into that, though I would obviously remind you that there is an upper limit on how much funding you can apply for, which will naturally limit the amount you could ultimately go on. In your application, you'll need to set out, your vision really needs to kind of set out across the piece what you're aiming to achieve for your students, and you'll be assessed on that overall view. So perhaps if you had one application where the skill, for example, skills, if you had one placement described in your application where the skills obtained were really clear and aligned with the Turing Scheme aims, and you had another where that was less clear, you might score lower. And ultimately, it's that overall application score that will make a difference to you receiving funding at all. What we don't do is make partial awards of funding anymore, because of the complexities that's caused in previous years. So if you do receive funding, you receive the full amount that you applied for, but your overall vision and the strength of your application across all your placements will be taken into account when we make that funding award. So next question, I understand for FE, the Turing Scheme needs to be linked to the student subject being studied. How will this be audited? So we will will we now have to submit our student study program as part of the reporting, and how will you deem what is a valid link? So if a project is teaching focus, what A levels would be this linked to? So this will be entirely assessed in the application and how well you're able to articulate how well your project is linked to something else that the student is being studied. So there won't, we're not planning an audit process for this at the moment. It's all about how well you can coherently describe those links at the application stage, which is true across a number of different aspects of the Turing scheme. So what we're looking for is to see that there's a coherent link to what the students are studying and what your objectives are for them across their education, as opposed to necessarily that it's about a subject-specific knowledge trip. So, for example, if you have a clear objective across a cohort of students, for example, to through the education and training to develop particular skills or to develop particular soft skills, that could be a valid reason for a trip. But we want you to be able to describe how the Turing scheme fits into everything else that you're doing for those students and how it helps complement their routine education. So I hope that helps with that one. But to be clear, there won't be a particular audit process. It's all about how you describe that at application phase. So question around our new definition of disadvantaged students includes those that come with the pupils with a family income of under 35,000. How will we know this how the information is different to those in receipt of FSM or Ever6 or pupil premium? So we do understand this is challenging for schools, as different systems have that different limits. What we would say is that within the criteria, there is flexibility, and we don't define particular methods for you to assess this. So what we're just keen to see is that you've made your best possible judgment. So some schools do use parental self-declaration. Others do ask parents to show particular evidence, but we don't have a single defined method. We are content for schools to use their judgment, and provided you keep a strong record of why you've made that judgment, then we are content with that. So next question, for primary schools, do you have to have a partner school and spend time in a foreign school or with their pupils? Or is a curriculum link such as visiting sites linked to their history topic okay? Would be an application be disadvantaged if it didn't have an international partner, especially in the justification of placement location? So in this question, no, you don't necessarily have to have a partner school. As I mentioned earlier, on the school's guidance, there's a range of different host organisations that you can set out. But you will need to, when you make an application, set out where you're planning to go and be able to strongly justify that. So you would need to have some details on the specific destinations that you're looking to go, and which, if any, organisations you're partnering with to do that, so that we can see that that's strongly justified. But it doesn't need to be a partner school. So the next question was around specific systems and processes around fraud and error. So what I would say on these questions is we want to make sure that everybody has the same information. So on that one, I would say I'm not going to give any further example beyond what's on the guidance. But what we'll want to see is that we don't have a kind of prescribed list of certain things that you must cover. We want to see that you clearly thought about this, you've consulted with anyone with expertise within your school, and you've got strong processes in place. So I would encourage you to look at the application guidance for that, but there isn't any more I can say specifically on that. Next question. I understand that in the application, we must identify the location. What would happen if we need to change locations after submitting the application? So we do understand that in life, things happen in life, and sometimes plans change and fall through. If you do need to change locations, there are circumstances in which you can do so, but you would need to contact us first and let us know in advance so that we can consider your reasons for doing that and understand why that is. And one of the main things we'd be looking to do would be to understand whether you're still going to meet the aims and objectives or similar aims and objectives to those that you applied for when changing the location as well. So it is possible, but you would need to contact us to discuss that further. Okay, so I'll work my way down these. So yeah, we will, Veronica, just to confirm, we will make this available on YouTube, so you'll be able to rewatch this afterwards as well. The next question, can you take more students on the trip than the number of the school bids for if those extra students wish to pay on the trip in full? Yes, so if you were you can't stretch funding between students, the grant rates are provided per student, but if on the same trip there were students funded from a completely different source, there's no objection from our side to do that, but you couldn't stretch out the during funding rates to cover more than one student, if that makes sense. So we have no objection to other students going if they wish to pay on the trip in full, that would be fine. And to confirm to Eugenio's question, yes, proportion of students from a disadvantaged background is one of the features that we use to determine funding, but it's not the only feature. So we use a weighted combination of the application score and the proportion of students from disadvantaged backgrounds to decide how we allocate funding in the school sector. And we will look at different scenarios using a combination of those things to work out what we think the optimum best fit for funding is, that both rewards those people with this really, really strong application and rewards those organizations with a high proportion of students from a disadvantaged background who we think would be least likely to otherwise get the opportunity to go on an international placement. So the next question, is it worth taking the time to apply this year? Last year, very few schools compared to FE in previous years were granted funding. So ultimately, this isn't something I myself can answer because yeah, the Turing Scheme is very competitive, but organisations are successful every year. We provided millions of pounds worth of funding to schools last year. The scheme has become increasingly more competitive over time, and we've made some difficult decisions about making sure that we try and fund organisations in full as opposed to giving everyone a little bit of money. But we would always emphasise, encourage schools that are really keen to run a mobility and have a strong proposal in line with the Turing Scheme aims to make an application. But obviously, it's at your decision whether you choose to do that or not. Next question, I don't believe I've answered. One of our proposed mobilities involves staying with student exchange families in Delhi before travelling to South India to do voluntary work. When students stay with host families, their living costs are very low, but the full budget would be used in the second half of the trip. Should we apply for less living cost days than we are actually in India? Can you see any issues with the model for a Turing Scheme application? So I will, if any of my colleagues wish to correct me, then please do so. But what I would say is I wouldn't advise you apply for less living cost days than you actually have on the trip. The living costs are provided at a standard set rate across the full placement duration. You don't need to take into account, daily fluctuations in what those costs might be. So I would advise you to apply for the full duration of the placement, accepting that some days will be more or less expensive than others. I would just pause there just to see if any other colleagues want to come in on that one.
Only to say you're spot on there.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, so just wanted to confirm that across the scheme heads here. Next question. See, Becca's already answered to confirm that a trust can apply as a consortium. Next question, is an offline application form available so text can be prepared ahead of loading on the application itself? We only have a Welsh offline guidance form available on gov.uk, but what I would say is that the guidance text that's available on the apply guidance page is the text that appears in the application pretty much. So that should give you all the information that you need to prepare your application before going into the portal. The other thing to consider is, obviously we would say this, but the portal, once you're in, should be straightforward to use and to go in and out of with a draft application. So that should be possible as well. So you don't necessarily need to have everything 100% kind of nailed down, completed before you start making an application. Next question. We had the funding 2 years ago, but even though we improved our application last year, why didn't we get it? Why could this be, and how could I improve my application to get more chances to get the funding? Yeah, I appreciate that, Eugenia, and I understand how frustrating that must be. I think the main things that that made last year so competitive were there was a very significant increase in the number of applications from schools, and the budget available was ultimately smaller. The other factor is that to avoid to making sure that when we award funding, projects are viable and organisations don't have to replan to have a smaller amount. The organisations that were successful, we gave them funding in full. So that means that ultimately, when you have a fixed budget, you're trying to fund people in full up to a limit, and a very competitive year with a big influx of applications, which is great. That does ultimately limit the number of people that we can fund. So I think the things I would encourage people to do would be to just really carefully read the application guidance and the accompanying hints that we've now provided on how you might be successful, and to really think about the aims of the scheme, in particular the importance that we place on funding students from disadvantaged backgrounds and students with SEND, and those two things will definitely be very helpful in making a funding application. Question from Ellie. I'm from a college. Currently, in previous years, we received funding for schools for level 2 and below students, and FE vet for level 3 students. So yes, it is possible for you to receive schools funding if you have students that are doing schools level qualifications. You can apply down the school stream. However, in that situation, it might be worth you just putting in some more details in an inquiry to the help desk inquiry form, just so we can guide you specifically for your students, because there are some complexities when you have younger students studying FE qualifications, but they're or like students studying school qualifications in an FE setting. So I would encourage you just put in an application, an inquiry into our help desk, setting out a bit more about the students you're intending to take and what they're studying, and we will be able to give you a more kind of definitive answer around which stream to apply to. Okay, so just moving back up to the top. So if we have a mobility for 15 students, but only 6 are pupil premium, do we only ask for funding for those 6? It's up to you to determine how many students you make an application for, but you can apply for students. You could apply for 15 students and set out that 6 are from a disadvantaged background. Turing Scheme funding isn't just limited to those with a disadvantaged background. We just prioritise those students. So it's up to you how many of those students you wish to include in your application and ask for funding for. Can you send funding to hire a coach for parts of the travel, where we have a high proportion of SEND pupils? Arrival is very late at night and transfer is not possible by other means to get to the final destination. So 2 things I would say about that. One is that transfers which could include hiring a coach can be funded from your travel funding. However, if there are costs that can't be met for travel funding that specifically relate to the circumstances of SEND pupils, then you could use your SEND funding to pay for that. So, for example, if you were to say in your application We've worked out that the travel funding, our students, because of who they are, will definitely need this form of transport to make sure that they can participate fully and manage their well-being and their health during a Turing Scheme placement. That the travel costs won't fully cover that, so we need some extra money to do that. If it's related to the costs associated with SEND pupils, then yes, you can use SEND funding to cover that as well. I will post the link shortly. Perhaps one of my colleagues could add the school's guidance in the link to that question, so you can see that there. And I can see Christine's question has been answered by Rebecca on whether you can apply on behalf of schools and also HE. Next question, the guidance mentions strengthening international partnerships. Would we be more likely to get funding if we return to a school we already have a link with? I think that's quite hard for me to answer because it depends how you answer the question. You don't necessarily, it's not necessarily that you would score higher if you already have a partnership. It's more about how you describe that. So if you can clearly say how the placement, how the sort of placement will help strengthen those links, then that would score highly. But sorry, it's a bit unhelpful, but it all kind of depends how you do it. So definitely make sure you go and read that bit of the guidance, the application guidance, and consider what we're asking there. Will locations in Europe more likely be rated higher than those further afield, given that value for money appears to have a larger weighting in the application this year? Not necessarily. The key thing we're looking for is that you can strongly justify your placement destinations. So there could be a very strong reason why you need to go on a long haul flight and that would be linked to the particular outcomes you're looking to achieve or the particular thing that your students are studying. And you know, that could prove to be good value for money. But we do want you to really justify why you've considered why that destination represents good value for money. So it might be that a location in Europe, you know, say for example, if you're doing something that could be done in any number of locations around the world, it might well be that you would score better if you could set out that, you know, you've chosen the nearest possible location. But it really depends on the individual circumstances and how you describe it to us and how you can set out how you've considered that value for money questions. Okay. I think, oh, another question just come in there. What will the funding instalments look like this year? AG 80%-ish in September, 20% afterwards, etc. I'm going to see if any of my colleagues wants to come in on that, whether we're able to say anything on those payment schedules yet.
I can come in and do that. It really depends on the size of your budget and when you are spending your budget. So we will be doing it as we are this year in the 4 quarters of the year. So if all your activity is happening in the first quarter, then you'd be getting 80% of that funding in that first quarter. But however, if it's spread out throughout the year, we will give 80% of what you're estimating in each quarter. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Emma. Okay. I'm just going to do a quick further check to see if there are any questions I've missed, but do please add any further questions into the Q&A chat. Oh, here we go. Is the focus on strengthening international partnerships intended to send us up to help for a future of shifting to the Erasmus programme? Nope. I would say that we've adjusted the assessment questions by doing a number of things. So we've looked at feedback from the assessors that assess the applications on where they think we could strengthen particular elements and acted on that. And we thought more about in particular the kind of the value of the Turing Scheme placements, where there is a strong evidence base for the things that they achieve and how we can bring those things out more clearly. So it's really based around sort of analysis of Turing Scheme placements and what we want to achieve within those as well. Okay, so the guidance collection should be appearing in the chat now. So within those pages, you will find a schools related guidance page and an overview page where you can click through to the application guidance too. This question, it's hard to estimate the proportion of disadvantaged students until we know we have the funding which students have signed up. Do we need to match the exact proportion we put in the initial application? So we want the application to be your best possible estimate of your cohorts based on what you know at this point in time. We do understand that these things might change later. And if you do have a substantial change in that, we would expect you to contact us and let us know that, and we'll review that individual circumstance. The key thing when we're addressing those circumstances is that you're clearly still delivering on the aims and objectives within the application. So, you know, if the disadvantage proportion changes from, 82 to 80%, we're not particularly worried about that. If you suddenly wanted to flip the entire student cohorts, then we would be more concerned about that. But it is possible to make those changes later. But you would need to contact us to explain why that is, so we can be assured that you're still proposing to deliver the aims and objectives within the application, and it's just a change of circumstances that's occurred there. Has the overall funding increased this year in line with the increased number of applications in recent years? So we'll confirm the budget for this year in due course. Unfortunately, not more I can say about that at this point in time. We have families from Nigeria who do not want to allow their children to participate in a Turing visit, as they say they were awaiting a decision about their residency and not allowed to accept any government funding. Does this apply as the school is getting the money? Would they be in jeopardy if their children went on a visit? So I think that's something that I can't answer off the top of my head, and we'd need to know a bit more detail. It might be worth putting into an inquiry into the help desk on this. What I would say is that students and parents and schools will need to make sure they've got the appropriate travel documentation to participate in a Turing Scheme placement. So if they do have residency conditions that mean that they are not able to travel out of the UK, then they would be able to participate. Actually, I realise this is asking something different about accepting government funding, so it's probably worth putting an inquiry into the help desk, and we can look at that in more detail. Sorry to not be definitive on that. Next question. Is there a disadvantage to using a previous successful application which we wrote as the basis for a new application with appropriate changes made for more recent guidance? Again, it's hard to say without, hard to say definitively. What I would say, we have changed the assessment questions this year. So we would want to, it would be assessed against those new assessment questions. So, you would need to look very carefully to ensure that the proposal was still in line with the Turing Scheme guidance and the assessment questions. And we would obviously expect, that to be a genuine placement you're still proposing to deliver, and you have assessed to be in line with the latest application question. So it's quite hard to say, but, the key thing is really look at those latest assessment questions and satisfy yourself that what you're putting in answers those things. Oh yeah, and the final thing I would say with that is, obviously we have got new assessment questions. There are areas that are similar and there are areas of new focus. So, we are still very much fundamentally interested in the skills that the students are gaining, the value for money of the placement, and the way you're going to encourage opportunity for students that wouldn't otherwise have it. But it is important to look against those new questions. As for SEND pupils, should the application be written having already had conversations with families around the possibility of attending our proposed project? There's no definitive rule here again, but we would say that I would advise yes, on the basis that we'll want you to set out details of who you're proposing to include, not with any personal details, but we want you to describe the cohort you're proposing to include and set out any support they need. And that for me would imply to have a knowledge of who it is that you're proposing to bring with you. Obviously, we accept that individual student circumstances may change, but there's no rule around this specific thing, but I would advise it's sensible to have considered all of those things first. So just looking at this, actually, I mentioned earlier, I misspoke earlier actually about there being a list of students, list of organisations you can go to as a school. And actually the reason for that is that we've actually removed the definitive list for this year because it actually wasn't serving a great use of purpose. So actually, I should correct what I said previously. So we don't have a definitive list of organisations you can partner with this year. You can set out to us in your applications what where you're proposing to go and what partnerships you're going to build with that organisation, but we don't have that definitive list any longer. So apologies for misspeaking there. We did have that list in previous years, but it isn't in that guidance this year anymore. So hope that clarifies matters. Okay, Martin, I think it's over to you then. But thanks everybody for your questions. Hope that was helpful.
Okay, thank you everyone for the questions that you've put to us today. Hopefully the answers that we've provided will be able to help you. I'll just finish off this session by pointing out the next steps. Obviously, continue to work with the guidance on the eligibility and grant rules that are available on gov.uk and the supporting videos on YouTube as you progress in your project planning and ultimately your application. Work to prepare, designing your placements and application. If you do need help, you can contact our dedicated Turing help desk using the inquiry form that's available online. And please bear in mind the applications, we are now open and the application window closes at 4 p.m. on the 16th of March. So that's the deadline to really focus on. Thank you very much for the time that you've given us today. As I say, if you have any further questions that occur to you, the help desk is the route to do that. We will be posting this video up in the next day or so on YouTube so that you can refer back to any of the answers that we've provided. Thank you very much for your time.